Welcome to a journey through wine regions, where terroir and tradition define the wine's soul. Terroir, the unique blend of climate, soil, and local practices, shape wine's character. In the Old World, like France's Bordeaux, in Italy's Tuscany, terroir is key and wines resonate with history. In the New World, regions like Napa Valley and Australia's Shiraz blend innovation with tradition. Emerging areas like Chile and Argentina add new flavors to the wine world. Whether it's New Zealand's cool climate or Argentina's warm terrain, terroir guides the winemaker, giving each bottle a sense of place. So raise your glass to the world's wine regions where terroir and tradition connect you to the land and the art of winemaking. So raise your glass to the world's wine regions where terroir and tradition connect you to the land and the art of winemaking. Cheers to a journey where every sip tells a story. Nikki, you have one foot, always have had one foot in the US, but then another foot in Italy. You're very rooted in Europe, a long family history. Can you talk a little bit about old world wines versus new world wines?
Well, obviously, we have traces of wines being produced since the Etruscan times, so even earlier than the Romans, and I think even earlier than that. They've actually even recovered clay jars on the bottom of the Mediterranean with old wine in it, though I doubt I'd try to taste it, but someone has, I think, and it wasn't particularly good, but it was preserved. So we have traces of wine for thousands of years back, and I guess now it's been finessed. But I think the U.S. has been producing wine. I think not just as long, but I think they've been producing wine for quite a while. It's just not become as well known or as famous for a while. Maybe out of poor trade or the snobbiness of the Europeans. That could very well be the case. Up until, the 1960s, 1970s. And then you have all these wineries emerging in California. It's absolutely fantastic jobs. I mean, I like U.S. wine. And there are great wineries in New York State and in New Jersey. And one other thing is, I guess, that climate change, as much as, whatever cause you attribute to it, it is changing. And that makes for a lot of regions to become producers that couldn't produce before or not so effectively.
Nikki, Chris asks a very loaded question. What country makes the best wine?
Okay, well, I'm going to answer that inappropriately. And the reason why I say that is, the old saying was, and people tend to repeat this to you over and over again, and they'll come and they'll say, well, the French, they make gold wines with silver grapes. And the Italians, well, they make silver wine with golden grapes. And I'm going to quote the great Homer Simpson and say, when he defined the French as being cheese-eating surrender monkeys. So Italy makes the best wine. Thank you.
All right, the controversy has begun. Jin, am I even saying terroir or terroir? Am I saying this correctly?
I think so. I mean, we all bastardize whatever the French word there is and German words there are. Terroir, I think it's a French word, and I think you're pronouncing it perfectly. But I won't really disagree with what Nikki was saying when he says Italy makes the best wine. But I think I'll leave that. It's a subjective matter, right? But you're gonna be partial to a certain place, and I've been a French wine drinker all my life, really all my life, as far as I could remember, and I thought they were the golden standards, and I love everything about French wines, and I'm an extreme Francophile. But I must admit that my palate started to change quite a bit over the past few years, and right now, and I gotta just stir up the pot a little bit. I'm gonna put Germany on the map over there and say that the Germans are making incredible wines these days.
How has your palate and taste changed over the years?
I got old. If you ever speak to the chefs or anybody, who used to, sell food and then same thing, when you're growing up, everything that you want is salty and spicy and sweet and crunchy. Like that's the only thing that you want in life, something very extreme, on the extreme spectrum. But the same thing happened with the wine as well. But although German wines can get extreme, especially with extreme acidity, sometimes extreme sweetness, sometimes extreme dryness, sometimes extreme, austerity. There's a lot there. But at some point, your palate kind of tones down to a point where you want less alcohol. You want something a little bit light and easier to drink. But not only that, I think there's for me, there's a tremendous amount of value for the quality that the German wines produce. So at some point, I have very difficult time justifying, the quality to price ratio on some of the French wines. Listen, I love Burgundy to this day. I love Champagne to this date. Those are by far my classic regions, and I'll never give them up, but sometimes not on my dime anymore.
Mm-hmm. When your customers in your restaurant are asking you for recommendations, do you get into terroir and how the soil affects the wine flavors? Does that enter the conversation?
I mean, it depends. If Andy, you're at the restaurant, you're asking me that questions, I'm just gonna skip over that because there's not gonna be a lot of connection there. But if someone who understands something about terroir and they'll ask me a very, very valid, legitimate question that tells me they understand a little bit more, then we'll dive in more in detail to form a discussion. Not really to tell them, drink this, you're gonna, I'm not gonna regret it. But like a lot of times when a guest asks that type of question, they want to learn more. And if I have something to teach, I'm not gonna have everything to teach all the time. I'm not an expert in every field. I may know something about the wines that I have on my list, and that's why they're on the list. And I could share my experience and my knowledge on that. And if it involves terroir, if it involves, what kind of soil type there is, what the elevation is, et cetera, then I'll share that with that particular people. But chances are, who's going to ask that kind of question is, I don't know, maybe 1% of the wine drinkers.
All right, I can pretend to be the 1%. Josh, what do you like to drink?
Well, I just want to compliment this little panel here. Jen, thank you for that. And one of the things about terroir, if I can comment on that, is my wife and I and the group we're part of, we always talk about wanting to connect, create spaces where you feel connected to earth, to the soil, to nature in some way. We call it the unplugged experience at our resorts. And so when we purchased the winery, we just dove deeply as we could, being investors and kind of restoration specialists. We wanted to cultivate an entire culture around the wine. So we ended up designing seasons. Obviously, the seasons of nature are already there, but the entire programming order came around the terroir and what's going on for the grape. And so I find that to be one of my favorite parts about wine. So if you were to offer me a tasting, just to answer this as a neophyte at the finer wines, I would enjoy the tasting that makes me feel one with the soil. So terroir, to me, I would be the person who definitely can't ask a great question, Jim, but I would love to hear more about why this one tastes more earthy. So anyway, I think the terroir element of storytelling is probably something I enjoy listening to at a tasting. And it's part of the story. I always say people build these wineries, just like your family, Nick, and they leave a little bit of themselves in that soil. So I appreciate the kind of lineage that the terroir creates. I mean, think about all the different work that had gone into cultivate that Champagne region, cultivate Bordeaux. To me, that's the romance of wine.
At your resorts, you're serving what you produce on site as well as what you import?
So we do not, because our brand name has winery in it, we only sell our wines, and our wines are curated between our grapes and the grapes of, we have to aggregate more grapes, of course, because we produce a high volume, a lot of guests, thousands and thousands of cases a year. So we have a combination of some of our legacy grapes are the Noah some chamber, some hybrid grapes, so you wouldn't necessarily know them. But these are some of those early grapes that helped the phylloxera problem, and that were planted. The Noah grape, which is like a white, almost like a Chardonnay grape, were some of those grapes that saved the wine industry 150 years ago. So ours has that kind of story embedded in the terroir and in the story. For us, it's all part of this killer legacy story, and why we fell in love with wine. But that's how we go about it.
Well, I'm going to have to make my way to Egg Harbor because I have not visited Renault Winery yet. You and I have known each other for quite some time now.
That's right,
I've only heard of it third hand because a family friend of mine, their nephew, got married there. So I know that you're succeeding in building not only a cool place, but a destination for people to celebrate anniversaries, weddings, and all kinds of special occasions.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God, Andy, because you and I are also on the investment side, and I don't want to ask this question because I'm sure you're about to, but I cannot wait to hear about the investing side of wine, because for us, we had to turn this around. We bought something that was bankrupt but historic, and we had to invest and revitalize. So for us, it's always been an effort of pouring. We always say, if this property and this winery has not closed since 1864, and it went through Prohibition and the Great Depression and whatever, then we're not going to let this baby die. So we're kind of more like, we're like the ones pouring our heart and soul into the winery. And we hope that eventually, as we develop more and more, the culinary life comes to fruition, the live demonstrations with chefs, the connoisseur sommelier events, all those different elements that come out of our properties it's us pouring our heart into the soil, just like everyone who came before us. So we think of wineries like that. And that's why I really respect people like Nick, who has a family that's gone through however many centuries of building wineries. It's definitely not a get rich quick thing.
But and then it's curious. I thank you and I appreciate what you say, but I guess I have a slightly opposing perspective here because, well, as a matter of fact, what we just did is we just sold our winery, and the reason we did that is multiple. I'm going to try to be quick. I don't want to become verbose, but we did this for a number of reasons. The first one is I love wine, but I'm not a huge fan of agriculture, which making wine falls under. And you got to do what you love. If you have a choice in life, if you don't have a choice, my heart goes out to you. But if you do have a choice, you got to choose to do what you love to do. And for me, it's not being in a vineyard, and especially when our winery was in Chianti, and it was about an hour away. So it was 2 hours to go and come back. We were close to Florence. The wine was actually very good. But in Chianti, as opposed to other niche markets, because the key word is always niche, Chianti has 3,000 producers. So you have to spend an enormous amount of money just on publicity, aside from making a good product. You've got to really make an impeccable product, actually. Spend a lot of money on that, then spend a lot of money on advertising, and you have to have a real passion for being in the middle of a vineyard. And it didn't click for us. We reinvested in different things, but we still love wine. We love the heritage of the winery that we had, and thank God it wasn't bankrupt. It just, it wasn't an investment that we wanted to make. So I told Andy, I said, well, you're going to have a little bit of an opposing perspective because you've got some Josh who just, acquired a winery. I don't know how long ago, but fairly recently, I imagine, or not so many years ago. And someone who sold it after, 250 years of having the property. And again, it comes down to niche. If my winery were in the Brunello region or in the Cortona region where I live, where there are very few producers, I would have certainly considered keeping it.
Oh, those are great insights. Since Josh was talking about investing in wine, let's go to segment 3. That was the perfect segue.